Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. So the previous week I posted a video about why maybe 3000 points would be the sweet spot for the game rather than the 4.5k. And then I discussed a lot of armies of 4.5k that over the years went down in points. Just to illustrate the point of everything became cheaper, we have more stuff on the table now. So it makes actually more sense to down tune a bit because well, the old 4,500 is not what it used to be anymore. And I think that with that video, I got a little bit carried away maybe because it ended up being quite a long video on what happens with 4.5 point armies over time, and does this lead to extra models on the table, etc. And well, this week I'm gonna get sidetracked again, I fear, because I was planning to do a video where I would discuss the advantages of 3000 points. It's gonna be a bit of a longer video because, well, I made a couple of lists on 3000 points and tried to make them a bit different from each other, show some advantages of 3000 points, show some flexibility in the list building, and then yeah, and that way try to convey a message that maybe 3000 points might be tactically more interesting than the 4.5k, because you have to make some decisions in your list building. So yeah, without further ado, I'll just go into the first list. This is going to be an Empire of SONNSTAHL gunline type of build. So you try to include everything that you want to include at 4.5k, but then at 3k, which makes it a bit more difficult. So as you can see, we have some magic. It's basically the bare minimum that you need for a gun line, because you have the reroll to hit, you have the +1 to wound from pyromancy. The wizard adept on pyromancy can also still take the altered sight from cosmology, and then you have one divination spell left that you can pick out. We have general, we have a BSB without any stuff because they don't need anything. We have an artificer to get better aim score on the volley gun, because that is sorely needed for a volley gun. And then we have 2 units of ranged damage potential. We have 2 support units, 2 parent units in the Imperial Guard, and then we have some flagellants to close out some weak points in the gun line, basically. Yeah, so that is the army. It's an army that still fills up the table quite a bit, but we'll see how it goes on the table in Universal Battle. So with this army, you can see that you can fill up the board quite decently still. We have the flagellant block, we have the units of light infantry, the heavy infantry support units, and the 2 Imperial Guard units. Otherwise, we have the artillery that's going to go in the back side of the deployment, and the rangers for some scouting, and then the characters over on the left. So the advantage, I would say, from 3000 points compared to 4.5 for this army is that you can still have a bit of mobility in deployment. So with 4.5k, you would end up with either corner camping or having to spread out your entire line because it just doesn't fit in the entire board. Because if you go for like a bit of a horde approach in your army building, then you will find out that you will just spread out all across the table, and you don't really have any choice anymore of what kind of pieces you want to go for and what you want to skip out on. So if you have, for example, this table and you're just playing frontline clash, then you might want to put your well, I have the wrong units now, but you might want to put your handgunners just in a position where they get some flank cover with a parent unit next to it, so that they can march up with a support unit next to that, so that they can counter charge. And then you see that your flank is still a bit open here. You can either decide to, well, you have the flagellants that you can use to just close up one of your flanks. And then you could say that you can just put these crossbowmen all the way in the corner, because that is a place where they're less likely to be charged. If you also, what I usually do with Empire parent support is that you nudge in one of your parent units on the side of the board. You have your support here in between. Well, with the inches, it's you should be able to get it all here, and then you can just use the flaglines to close off this entire lane. It's quite a sturdy block to just protect your flank, but you can also see what the enemy is doing. I mean, you can always just move around a bit, move forward a bit, and try to get involved in the battle in that way in a later sense, or in a later phase of the game. But as you are playing 3,000 points instead of the 3,000 or the 4.5k, oh, this catapult is really stuck there, and the cannon as well. So I was going to move the cannon and the catapult in the corner. But if you're playing 3k instead of the 4.5, then you can still decide to go for this side, or you can decide to go for the other side with the hill. And that is in a scenario where you have decided to go for a lot of troops on the table. If you go for a lot of troops on the table with 4.5k, you will practically have like 1.5 times as much as we now have. For example, you would have another unit of flaglines. You can have some extra core. So just because basically 1.5 times this would be, if you keep the characters the same, would be more or less this. And then some bits and bobs here and there. So you can close off the right side of the board, and then with the rest you can actually also just close off the other side of the board. Well, this is going to be like this, then you want your support over there, this guy's over there, then you want probably the flaglines on one flank, and then that's a tough one. You can do it like this, where you put the flaglines all the way on the other flank. Support unit can go there. These guys are a bit stuck, but yeah, something along the lines of this is what you're gonna get. So you flood literally the entire field, because otherwise you won't have the space to move out. So I think that is also an advantage of 3.5 or 3k, where even if you go for kind of a horde army, you don't have to. Well, you cannot cover the entire board, and there's some decisions to be made of whether to go for the right side of the board or the left side of the board. So yeah, in this case, it's also well, obviously in 4.5k, people don't really want to play these kind of very big armies, because well, this is what you're gonna end up with. You don't really have a choice of whether you want to go for the entire table or whether you want to go for like a corner. And at some point, table space is also really going to affect your list building. So this is something that Orcs and Goblins often has a problem with, that everything is of a certain quality that it is so cheap that you will end up covering the entire board. Something like Goblin Wolf Chariots looks really appealing when you look at the cost. But within the army, they're not that good, I would say, even, because they take up a lot of board space. And well, there's one turn where they charge away, and then you have to fill up that board space with something else. But everything that's going to fill up that board space in your line is going to be of a quality that is of lower quality than your opponent's stuff generally. So it will make a very big void in your lines once you charge out with your chariots. Yeah, so this is one example. The next example I would like to talk about is this Empire of SONNSTAHL list. So it's a completely different list, just to show also that within an army book you can go for completely different armies at this format. So you're not really pushed towards including both magic and combat and ranged if you have it in the army, and everything that you can. And you can really focus on certain aspects of an army that you really like. So some armies, for example, also have a bit of an issue with their core, where you practically end up always taking more or less the same core choices, or a combination of the same core choices, because with the core choices that you would want to take, you're not going to fill up your entire core, and then you have to take something else, and then one thing leads to the other. But now with, for example, this Empire of SONNSTAHL list, you can do this, where you where you basically make an armored list with an electoral cavalry unit, with knightly orders, with a Knights of the Sun Griffin unit, with a steam tank and a dragon. And that is basically your army, with some bits and bobs there. So this is totally different from the first army that we saw, and it's going to be interesting to see it on the table. So this would be the other Empire of SONNSTAHL list. This is to show that also within the same army book you can build vastly different armies that might have a very different footprint on the table also. In this case it's a nearly all mounted cavalry army. So we have the Marshal and the Dragon. I don't have Universal Battle Premium anymore, so it's Pegasus in this case. I have the Knight Commander on the Young Griffin. Then we have a Prelate on a horse. Unit of Knights of the Sun Griffin, big unit of Knights, knightly orders, small units of electoral cavalry, steam tank, and the Rangers. So this entire army only has 6 drops. If you use the Rangers as a normal drop, otherwise it only has 5 drops. Fun thing there is that also your opponent can only get like a +5 then for deployment. And if you're playing something like marching columns, where you just have to first deploy 3 things each, and then you can only drop, then after that your opponent can only get a +2 on you. So that is, I think that's also quite a fun mechanic in this smaller army format, where you can do stuff like that. Also, it makes for more important decisions, I would say, as with this army you now really have a lot of table space, and you cannot really pull this off with 4.5k. So if your opponent drops, you can still decide to just castle up in a corner and make it quite tight. Then the steam tank, I couldn't move it before, but I can move it again. I don't know. Universal Battles sometimes has some movement issues, I have found. So yeah, you can still afterwards really hunker up, and then, well, put this guy over here somewhere. This guy in the unit. It doesn't do it automatically still. Yeah, so you can corner camp quite heavily if you want to, and then if you see your opponent doing stuff that you like or you don't like, you can even decide to just throw these guys out 18 inches with your dragon, because you do have the order. Now your dragon can turn a bit. You can push out the Knights of the Sun Griffin, and then you can decide to just walk around your opponent with the steam tank covering your ass. I think this is something that is getting lost in bigger games, because then, well, your next turn you could go there, for example. That would be cool. 6 and 7. So the flexibility in where you want to go with your army. If you play 4.5k, then I feel that you're a bit locked in one person being on one side, the other person being on the other side, and you're just locked in this push for the middle, where everyone just has stuff everywhere. So, for example, I would have a small fast unit over there. I would have a big combat block there, with a Stalker Standard, because everyone has a Stalker Standard or something terrain ignoring in their army. Ooh. So if you end up with these would just be positions of dangerous units basically. So if you have something like a standoff like this, then I can move forward a bit with everything. Then my opponent can take a gamble somewhere, can do like a very small field charge, open up his flank a little. Maybe enough for me to get a flank charge. That could be an option. However, if we both have armies that are as big as this, so I'll just put this army up here. Just ignore these characters for a bit now. And then we put a similarly sized army up on the other side. If we have something like this, it's going to be way more interesting, I believe, because then you can have a person who puts his heavy cav all the way on the flank, and then some other unit on the other flank with a steam tank in the middle. That is for example, an option with some scoring still close to an objective, and dragon here. You could do something like this, for example, and then, well, your opponent, if he hunkers down in one corridor, then he is going to have an advantage on that flank. However, it's going to be way more likely for you to be able to go over the flank, use these knights still for scoring on this side, and then actually play a game rather than playing frontline clash with all of your armies all the time. Because in this case, well, this guy could just move up a bit, but he has to really use his team tank to cover his flank. And then you do get a frontal clash between the knights here on the right side in this scenario. But these knights of the Sun Griffin, they can really roam freely now because of the advantage of the position that they've taken. And I think that at 4.5k, it's way less likely that you have a part of the board that is not being used that much. The only situation in which that is the case is whether you really have impossible terrain in places like this and like this, and then you narrow down the field. And then you can maybe sneak up one unit through the gate, but then it becomes a bit of a one-on-one engagement. And then you even narrow down the field more. Yeah, so that is to also give you an idea of what Empire of SONNSTAHL could do, or how flexible basically lists in general are. That's just to give you an idea of what a 3k army could look like for Empire of SONNSTAHL, as an alternative to just a gun line that's putting down as many bodies as they can. And then we'll go to an even smaller army actually, so this is going to be Warriors of the Dark Gods. And this list I mostly put together just for fun, just to see how many points I could still put up in a single unit. So you have a Wizard Master on a Dragon. Dragon at 3,000 points is also not that unimpressive. Then we have a big Doomlord brick in Forsworn. We just have a unit of Warriors and a Marauding Giant. So that's quite a compact list. So as you can see, the army is actually quite small on the table. So you only have 4 units, considering that you will play probably the Doomlord in the Forsworn. I'm using Lizardmen as Warriors of the Dark Gods here because I don't have premium Universal Battle anymore, but we have the Marauding Giant, we have the Sorcerer on Dragon, and then we have the Big Lizardman, the Forsworn block with the Doomlord, and we have the Warriors of Greed. And in this scenario, you can really see that there's some choices that you have to make in terms of list building and board space, basically, because if you do this, then, well, this is going to be your deployment likely. Yeah, like you can't really, if you want to spread out a lot, you could spread out a lot, but your warriors are going to be caught out in the open at some point. You need some kind of flank protection, like a building or something. Forsworn, they can basically handle themselves because of the bodyguard. However, if they're going to get charged on 2 sides, then you won't be able to reform. So if you get charged in both flanks, then you better make sure that your Doomlord is not in the middle of the unit. And then we have the Dragon. The Dragon is still quite flexible and quite mobile, so you would basically need an entire army that is quite mobile in order to pull it off with 4 units. If you do it like this, then the warriors are definitely gonna feel out of sync with the rest, basically, because the Forsworn, they can handle themselves. The other 2 are mobile enough to not get out in places where you don't want them, but the warriors are gonna be an issue, even though they are probably quite hard to remove at 3,000 points. But you could play this. So this is, I like that you can basically say at 3k, like, yeah, come at me. I'm just gonna go in a corner. You can have the entire table. I don't really care too much. This is gonna be my army. Come get me. and we'll see where that goes. So I think it's you can also, against the right opponent, you can still space them out quite evenly, trying to make sure that your opponent cannot really deploy anywhere, and then because as a flank unit on 3,000 points, a giant is quite decent even, so you can just move them up on the flank, move these guys up 12 inches, move these guys up 8 inches, or this guy has Strider Ruins, I believe, so you can just move them up there. And then you basically cover nearly the entire board still with 4 units, even though your charge range is a missile on the Great Warriors. Yeah, I wouldn't expect this list to work pretty well, but I think it's a good answer for people that are not that experienced in the game, to still be able to also comprehend the game on a small level. If you want to do this at 4.5K, you're still gonna well, it's gonna be quite a easy army to play in that sense, because you're gonna have like another big thing like a dragon. You're gonna have maybe another block of Greed Warriors, because you have to fill out your core as well. And then you go over core, but that's fine. You can maybe go to 3 giants or something. This looks already more like 4,500 if these are really beefy monsters. And yeah, you can play this. I wouldn't necessarily play it myself, because of the anti-synergy with the Greed Warriors, or at least just Warriors in general with the rest of the list, because that is one of the issues of Warriors. I think they just have advance 4, and you really have to get them up to speed in order to do something with them. So either a Helm, or you need Envy, or you need to have some built-in insurance like Pride, I think, because Pride really helps out Warriors more than people imagine. Yeah, so this would be like 4,500. Let's go back to the 3,000. I think it really speaks for itself that this is interesting in itself, but not quite what you want to field on 3,000 points, I think. Yeah, but it's nice to just show this also. Then as a last example, I have an Orcs and Goblins army that normally can fill the board up quite nicely. So here I still have a big unit of Orc Bashers. You could still divide it up in some smaller units. But this is just to give you a general feel of how an average Orcs and Goblins army could be able to fill up the board. So from left to right we have 2 Skewers, we have an Orc Catapult, we have 3 Goblin Wolf Chariots, we have the Feral Orc Bashers with spears, then we have twice Feral Orc Mounted Bashers, or did I just get the normal ones? Let me see. Mounted Bashers. Then we have 2 Giants, then we have a National Wrecking Team and a Pump Wagon. So this is still quite a condensed list for Orcs and Goblins at this point size, at this point level, because of the big block of Orcs that is 760 points. So that is quite a meaty, chunky unit. However, at these point levels, I feel like it's also quite a good choice. So, as usual with Orcs and Goblins, you can still just clutter the field quite nicely with just ballistas in every corner, with Goblin Wolf Chariots that take up a lot of space, with the Advashers that can go basically on the flanks, with Pump Wagon that can go somewhere to be annoying, with a Wrecking Team that can keep the enemy off your lines, and then 2 Giants to fill it out. So even with this expensive Orc block, you can still fill up the deployment quite nicely. And that's just Orcs and Goblins for you, basically. You could replace this with like 3 units of Night Goblins, so you would have a unit here, a unit. I can just make them, I guess. So I'm currently in a unit with low power for this. So a unit of 40 is kind of decent, I think. So you can have one unit here. Oh dear. One unit here. This you could have instead of the orcs. So you have something like this. This would be more of like a holding army rather than a fighting army. Because night goblins they don't really fight that well. But if you have something like this, you can still fill up the entire board. That is quite funny with orcs. That you have just the tools to fill up everything basically. You have these annoying things that can always deal a lot of damage on small game sizes basically. And then the giants and orcs and goblins with swifts, right? It's amazing. So this would be one option to just completely screen off the entire field. What you can also do alternatively at 3,000 points with even an army like this is to just go for one corner of the battlefield. In this map you actually also have a hill that is quite nice for this. So you can use one unit of your head bashers to screen off your flank. You have the very long threat range from the goblin wolf chariots that can help you out here. The only thing that you have to hope for is that they don't flee off. Then you can have a war, so you really want to make use of that hill basically. So probably your head bashers want to go on there together with the giant at some point, and then you still have these two kinda screen off a flank. You still have a Nash wrecking team and a bomb wagon. You could actually just play the Nash wrecking team over here and then first turn let it go in this direction to the east, so that you can have a turn where it plays a bit defensively. You can go another time here, you can go back there, you can go. That actually seems quite nice as a flank protector. Then you can play these double. And then you can, well, the pump wagon I would just send out probably. Two giants here. This doesn't even seem too bad, because now you can first turn, you can build up some pressure by sending out one of these guys directly, because they have paired weapons anyway. So it's less important who's going to charge. You have a backup unit that can go. If you put these like, probably straight. So at a point where you're still where you have still the enemy in the front side, the front arc of your unit. You don't really want the enemy to go off. Depending on agility, you can just make two lines with them, and the bump wagon probably goes forward while this happens first. So you can use him as a bit of a counter, or a bit of a piece where the enemy can go through. You can set up for counter charges with the rest. Then you can move up the head bashers because they are gonna head bash. You have your wolf chariots to zone out the enemy, and you can basically play a bit of a waiting game with your two scourers and your ballista or your catapult. It's definitely not going to be enough to win you the battle. However, I think it makes for more interesting battles where this would be like the first turn of the game, rather than just having to flood out around the entire table with orcs and goblins all the time. So if you have this, orcs and goblins is quite decent at low point levels, because you can build quite a decent defensive line. Also, by the time that the enemy is going to get through on this side, you're going to have taken the revenue out of your shooting probably. And if you haven't, then, well, it's not going to matter anyway. And then it also creates a bit more of a dependency on your wolf chariots being there, because if you are going to charge them out, you can charge there, so you can charge like here. You do have your long charge range on your wolf chariots, so 18 inch should be quite doable. But if you do that, then you're going to end up with your unit going over there, all the way over there, and suddenly the flank of your Adbashers is a bit more vulnerable, so you would have to do something with them. You can go there maybe. Or you would have to use suddenly some giants to shield that off. I'm just thinking that it becomes a bit more of a tactical game if you actually can use the playing field as a playing field rather than a shoving forward field with sometimes a weird angle that you can pull on your opponent. So I think the take home message there is that I'm looking for a bit more flanking action in 9th Age, which and then I mean a bit more large scale flanking action, like really these moves where you move up first and then you just start to wheel in at the end, and then your entire army is doing like a flanking action rather than having a unit. So for example like this, where in your movement phase you try to measure it out, and then in the end it ended up being something like this. And then you're like, oh yeah, these guys, they are actually in my flank rather than in the front where I try to get them. They have a flank on me on like a roll of an 8 or something without any swift stride, and then they make it and then they ruin your game. Because in that point, if you have this standoff, that is also what happens a lot in 9th Age actually. So you have these two armies that are facing off against each other. For example, this is my opponent. Like this, and then well, usually people try to make sure that you don't really have any good angles on them. But if you have something like this, where on the bottom is my army, on the top is my opponent's army, could this be a good one? I'm not fully happy with this. I was just thinking. Basically, this is an instruction of how the game can go south really quickly for you. So if I have something like this and then I turn them there, something like this would be a good scenario. So then the inches should still work out with everything being 1 inch apart, more or less. Yeah, so I have something like this. This is what my opponent set up. He's trying to cover his other flank with these guys. That actually seems to work fine because I have line of sight, going double with my everything. So this guy, imagine that this guy has movement 8. Yeah, it is a giant, so that could actually be 8. So these are both giants. I have a wrecking team here. The wrecking team is just going to do its own little stuff. If in my movement phase, if I declare a charge with this guy on the adbashers over there, so the distance, I don't know how to do this in this program anymore. So the distance from here to here is like 18 inches. You can also actually see it from the blue circles. That was it. So it's 18 inches, and if I measure it out again, I am actually in his flank. He's fearless, he cannot flee, so I managed to make my charge on a 10 with my swift stride, because I can call the war, I go in there, and then I defeat this unit. It's a panic check for this model. Well, it used to be a pump wagon, but imagine that it's just a panic check. Panic's over here. I get an overrun with my swift stride, and then on a 10 I actually get into the flank of these orcs. This is what happens quite common in my experience in 9th Age, where you get unexpected flanks basically. In situations where I wouldn't necessarily say that you should have gotten the flank. But that is the way in which you can still get flanks in 9th Age. But if you look at the previous scenario, then I was here. This is no way a flank for my giant, because I'm still at 18 inches. In order to get a flank on this unit, I have to move this guy somewhere here, and then I'm in range of these guys again. This guy has to go over here somewhere. I can charge by that. I'm getting a little bit sidetracked. However, what I wanted to convey basically is that most engagements in 9th Age, in my experience, are now front-to-front engagements where one guy tries to get a charge, makes it or doesn't make it. The other guy tries to get a charge. It's very often also on a unit that actually failed to charge or repositioned in just slightly the wrong way, and then at some point you're gonna get that juicy flank somewhere. Game shifts around. Um, and that is how a game is being played. Um, and it's more like a frontal pushing rather than some kind of flanking action where you really have one player in one corner that doesn't have the resources anymore to fill up the entire board space and then zone out everything. And then you have the other player trying to make advantage of that. It's more like micro scale tactics rather than the bigger picture, and that is, I think, a shame. That was a longer one than expected. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you the next time.